She was 8 months pregnant. She had driven 40 minutes in heels that no longer fit right, wearing a dress she had tailored specifically for tonight, because tonight was their anniversary, and her husband had asked her to be there.
It was my fault.
She walked into the restaurant, and she saw the ring. Not just any ring, her ring, the one that had gone missing 14 months ago, the one she had cried over, the one her husband had held her and comforted her about losing. It was on another woman's finger at their anniversary table, with her husband sitting right beside her. And that was only the beginning, because what Celeste did not know yet, what she was about to spend the next 72 hours uncovering, was that the ring was not the worst thing he had taken from her. The marriage certificate in her bag was about to prove that her entire life had been built on a lie. One document, 6 years, and a billionaire who thought he had planned for everything. He had not planned for her. This is a story about what happens when a woman stops protecting someone else's secret and starts protecting her own truth. For every woman who was ever told she was overreacting, this one is for you. If this story made you feel something, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you have done in her shoes? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories about women who refuse to stay silent, subscribe to this channel. We are here every week.
The string quartet was playing Pachelbel's canon. Celeste heard it before she saw anything, the warm, familiar cascade of notes drifting through the entrance of Meridian, wrapping around the murmur of crystal glasses and quiet conversation and the soft percussion of expensive silverware against porcelain plates. She had danced to this song at her own wedding. She stood in the entrance and let the maitre d' take her wrap. Her feet hurt. They had hurt since Tuesday. 8 months and 3 weeks pregnant, and her body had stopped pretending any of this was comfortable. The midnight blue dress had been tailored 3 weeks ago because nothing else fit. She had stood in the seamstress's studio with her hands on her belly and thought, at least I'll look like I tried. She had tried. The maitre d' smiled and gestured toward the main room. Celeste followed him through the warm golden light of Meridian. She knew this restaurant the way you know a place that has been a part of your marriage. The corner table where Prescott closed his first major deal after they were together. The bar where they had celebrated her 31st birthday. Table 4, with its curved banquette and the view of the city lights where they had sat for their 5th anniversary. She was heading toward table 4 now. She saw the city lights first, then the white tablecloth, then the champagne in the ice bucket, then the woman in the champagne-colored gown with her hair swept up and her head thrown back in laughter. Then she saw the ring. Celeste stopped walking. The maitre d' turned, puzzled. He said something. She did not hear it. She was looking at the ring. Platinum setting, oval solitaire. The tiny engraved band of forget-me-nots around the base that Prescott had commissioned because she had once said, at a flower market on a Sunday morning 6 years ago, that forget-me-nots were the most honest flowers. They say exactly what they mean, she had told him. He had remembered. He had built it into the ring. She had reported that ring stolen 14 months ago. She had cried about it in this man's arms. The woman in the champagne gown was showing it to the man beside her, laughing. Her hand turned slightly in the candlelight so the oval stone caught and held the flame. The man beside her turned his head. It was Prescott. He saw her at the exact moment she saw him see her. His face moved through 5 different calculations in under 1 second. She watched it happen. She had been married to this man for 6 years, and she had never seen his face do that before. Or perhaps she had simply never been standing at the right angle to see it. He started to stand. The woman followed his gaze. Her smile changed. Her hand dropped to her lap. The ring disappeared below the tablecloth. Celeste did not cry. She did not make a sound. What she did was this. She reached into her evening bag. She took out her phone. She looked at it. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock. There was a text from Prescott, sent 3 minutes ago. At the bar, order the champagne. She had not ordered anything. She had been standing in the entrance being handed her wrap back by a confused maitre d' while her husband sat at their anniversary table, showing another woman her stolen wedding ring. She put the phone away. She walked to the table. Her back hurt. Her feet hurt. Her daughter was pressing against her ribcage in the slow, insistent way she did when Celeste's body tensed. She walked through the warm golden room, and she sat down in the empty chair across from her husband, and she placed her evening bag on the white tablecloth, and she looked at the woman beside him. The woman was beautiful. Of course she was. 29, perhaps 30, with the kind of bone structure that reads as effortless and almost certainly is not. Her eyes were gray. Her posture was perfect. She was looking at what Celeste with an expression that Celeste could not immediately name. Not guilt, not defiance, something stranger, something that looked almost like pity. Celeste looked at her hand, the hand in the lap, below the tablecloth, where the ring had gone. She said, very quietly, "That's my ring." The woman opened her mouth. "Don't," said Celeste. Just the one word, clear and level as a surgeon's first cut. She looked at Prescott. He was sitting very still. The man who had built a company from a leveraged buyout and sheer will, who had survived hostile takeovers and market catastrophes, who always had the right answer ready before the question finished being asked. He was sitting very still, and his hands were flat on the table, and he was doing the calculations again. "Happy anniversary, Prescott," Celeste said. "Celeste." His voice was controlled, almost gentle. "This isn't... You're misunderstanding the situation." She had heard a version of that sentence many times. She had always, until this moment, allowed it to reframe whatever she was looking at. "You're misunderstanding. You're overreacting. You're not seeing the full picture. Let me explain. Tell me," she said, "how long you've been planning to replace me." "You're being..." "Don't say overreacting," she said. "Please don't say that word to me tonight." He didn't say it. He looked at the woman beside him, then back at Celeste, then at his champagne glass. One calculation after another. She watched him select the approach. "We should discuss this privately," he said. "Not here, not like this." "You chose here," Celeste said. "You chose this restaurant. Our anniversary. This table." She looked at the champagne. "You ordered champagne." A small pause. "I can explain everything," he said. "I'm sure you can," she said. "You're very good at it." She stood up. Slowly, because her back hurt and her daughter was 7 pounds of protest, and she owed this body some dignity after everything she'd just asked it to walk through. "I'll be at the Alderton Hotel," she told him. "Don't contact me until you have something true to say." She picked up her evening bag. She looked at the woman once more. The woman was still watching her with that strange expression, not triumph, not shame, something in between, something private. Celeste nodded once. The way you nod at someone you will need to understand better. Later. Then she walked out of Meridian, through the warm golden room, and she did not look back. She made it to the sidewalk before her hands started shaking. The city was doing its ordinary Friday night things. Couples walking, a cab idling, somewhere a doorman whistling. Entirely indifferent to the fact that her life had just split cleanly into before and after, the way bones do when the break is precise. She opened her phone. She found the name she needed. She pressed call. Nora answered on the first ring. She always answered on the first ring. "Celeste? It's Friday night. Are you..." I need you to find something for me, Celeste said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by that. I need you to find out when Prescott Hargrove was first legally married. His first marriage, the one he told me ended in Nevada in 2015. A silence. Celeste, Nora's voice had changed. Carefully. What happened? Someone was wearing my ring, Celeste said. The one that was stolen. She was wearing it at our anniversary dinner. Another silence. I'm coming to you, Nora said. Where are you? Getting in a cab, Celeste said. Alderton Hotel. Bring your laptop. I'm already moving, Nora said. The cab pulled into traffic. The city lights blurred through the window. Celeste put one hand on her belly. Her daughter kicked once, hard, deliberate. I know, Celeste said, quietly. I know. She looked out at the city she had lived in for 6 years as Prescott Hargrove's wife. The same city, the same lights, already entirely different. She had been a corporate lawyer before Prescott. She understood evidence. She understood the difference between what you fear and what you can prove. She was going to prove everything. The Alderton Hotel smelled like eucalyptus and clean linen. Celeste had stayed here once before, the night before her wedding. Prescott had insisted on the tradition of not seeing each other. She had thought it was romantic. She had ordered room service and watched old films and thought, tomorrow my life begins. She thought about that now. Room 1408. She hadn't asked for it. It was simply what was available. The universe had opinions tonight. She sat on the edge of the king bed in her midnight blue dress, shoes off, one hand flat on her belly. The room was warm. The HVAC hummed. Outside the window, the city moved and glittered and knew nothing about her. Prescott called at 9:17. She watched his name on the screen. She did not answer. He called again at 9:22. At 9:31, at 9:55, a text arrived. You're being dramatic. Come home and we'll talk like adults. She looked at that word, dramatic. She screenshotted it and sent it to Nora without comment. Then she started to think. Not the frantic circular kind of thinking, the what, how, why spiral that had been burning in her chest since the restaurant. The other kind, the kind she used to do at her desk at the firm, working backward from a conclusion to find where the evidence lived. She thought about the ring. It went missing on a Wednesday morning in March, 14 months ago. She had been getting ready for a charity luncheon. Prescott was leaving for a conference in Seattle. He had kissed her cheek. He had said, "You look beautiful. You don't need the ring." She had worn the replacement band instead. He had taken it that morning. She understood that now, with the cold clarity of things you have known for a long time without being willing to say so. She thought about the insurance claim. $42,000. She had cried through the phone call with the adjuster. Prescott had sat beside her and rubbed her back and told her it was just a thing. Things could be replaced. What mattered was that she was safe. He had sat beside her and rubbed her back, while the ring was in his jacket pocket. She thought about Vivian Aldridge. She knew who Vivian was. She had seen the name in Bryn Delacroix's society column 2 years ago. Socialite and arts patron. She had read it over breakfast and thought nothing of it because she was a wife who trusted her husband, and trusting your husband meant not assembling evidence about the names in society columns. She thought about trust, specifically the architecture of it, how Prescott had built hers. Not with warmth, or not only with warmth, but with precision. A small inconsistency here explained away smoothly. A late night there, accounted for with detail that felt too specific to question. A pattern of reasonable answers to questions she hadn't known she was asking. God, she thought, I was so careful not to see it. I was practically helping him. She was still sitting on the bed when she heard the knock. Nora came through the door with a laptop bag over one shoulder and 2 cups of herbal tea from the lobby. She was still in the blazer she'd had on at whatever dinner Celeste had interrupted. She looked at Celeste on the bed, and she set down the tea, and she sat in the armchair across from her, and she said, "Talk." Celeste talked. She started with the ring and worked backward for 6 years. By the time she finished, Nora had filled 4 pages of a legal pad, and the tea had gone cold. The room was quiet for a moment. "Okay," said Nora. "Here's what I need to know. Do you have any documentation of his first divorce? The Nevada filing? Dates? Paperwork? Anything he showed you?" "He showed me a document once," Celeste said, "early on, before we got engaged. It looked official. I didn't examine it closely. Would you recognize it if you saw it again?" "I don't know." "Maybe." A pause. Why? Nora looked at her legal pad. She was doing the thing she always did when she was building towards something she wasn't sure how to say, tapping the pen against the pad in a slow, even rhythm. "But because," Nora said carefully, "I received a call tonight before you called me, about an hour before, from a woman I have never spoken to. She said she had information about Prescott Hargrove's marriage history, that she'd been sitting on it for 2 years and couldn't sit on it any longer." Celeste went very still. "Who called you?" "Her name is Harriet Beaumont," Nora said. "She was Prescott Hargrove's first wife." The HVAC hummed. The city moved outside. Celeste looked at Nora and understood that the ground she had been standing on was not the ground she thought it was. "What did she say?" "She said the divorce was never finalized." Celeste's mouth went dry. "The papers were filed," Nora continued. "But there's a procedural error in the Nevada court record, a specific one, the kind that, if you know where to look and have the original marriage certificate, which Harriet kept, means the dissolution was never legally complete." The silence in room 1408 stretched out long and wide. "He's still married to her," Celeste said. "Technically, yes. Which means my marriage is void," Nora said. "Yes." Celeste stood up. She walked to the window. The city was still there, indifferent and glittering and entirely unaware that the woman in 1408 had just discovered that 6 years of her life had been built on a foundation that did not exist. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. "I'm not crazy," she thought. "I know what I saw. She was wearing my ring, and now I understand why the ring had to disappear. Because Vivian needed to believe she was the real wife, and I needed to believe I was the real wife. And Prescott needed both of us to believe it at the same time, in the same city, without ever being in the same room, until tonight. When whatever he was planning went sideways." "Celeste," Nora said quietly, "I'm here." She turned from the window. "I need to see Harriet Beaumont tomorrow. Can you arrange that?" She asked for the meeting herself. "Good." Celeste walked back to the bed. She sat down. She picked up the cold herbal tea and took a sip and set it back down. "And I need Raymond Alcott's number." "The attorney who handled the Caldwell Price case?" "He's the best family law attorney in this city. I researched him 2 years ago." Nora looked at her. "You researched divorce attorneys 2 years ago?" "I researched them," Celeste said simply. "I didn't use the information. I put it away and I didn't use it." A pause. "I knew something," she said. "Not specifically, not the way I know it now, but I knew something. And I chose not to know it better than I did." Nora said nothing. There was nothing to say. Book Raymond Alcott for Monday morning, Celeste said, and find out what rights I have as the mother of his child, legal marriage or not. I want to understand every option on the table before he knows I'm looking. Already on it, Nora said. Prescott called twice more before midnight. Celeste watched his name light up and go dark, light up and go dark, like a signal from a country she used to live in. She did not answer. She lay back on the bed with her shoes off and her midnight blue dress on, and her daughter pressed warm and alive against her ribs, and she looked at the ceiling of room 1408, and she did not cry. Not yet. She was saving that for somewhere private, the ice machine down the hall. A door closing 2 rooms over, the soft, steady rhythm of her own breathing. It was 2:47 in the morning, and Celeste could not sleep. Nora had fallen asleep on the second bed at midnight with her legal pad on her chest and her reading glasses still on. Her breathing was slow and even. She looked like a woman who had made peace with the world, which Celeste found both admirable and completely foreign to her current situation. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room. She pulled her knees up as far as her belly would allow, and she stared at the search bar. She typed. She deleted. She typed again. Can a marriage be invalid if one party was already legally married? She read for 20 minutes. Then she typed again. Bigamy laws in the United States. Then, what happens to a child born in a bigamous marriage? Then, financial rights of a putative spouse. Then, does a bigamous spouse retain inheritance rights for unborn child? Then, at 3:42 in the morning, something she had not expected to find. The putative spouse doctrine, a principle that protected a good faith spouse, someone who entered a marriage without knowledge of its invalidity, and granted her legal protections close to those of a lawfully married spouse. She read that paragraph 3 times. She had been a good faith spouse. She had not known. Everything she was reading told her that her lack of knowledge was documented in her own behavior, in the insurance claim, in the 6 years of being Prescott Hargrove's wife, in every public and private way possible. He had known. She had not. That distinction was going to matter enormously. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark hotel room, and she let the memories come. Not the bad ones, not yet. The good ones. Prescott at a bookstore in Seattle, calling just to say he'd found a first edition she would love. His voice on the phone, warm and easy, like a man who was thinking of her in the middle of his day. She had kept that message for a year. Prescott in the kitchen on Sunday mornings, making the terrible coffee he never admitted was terrible, sliding it across the counter with that half smile that meant, I know, just drink it anyway. The night he proposed, a private rooftop, the city spread below them, his hands shaking slightly. She had found that so touching, the tremor in a powerful man's hands. She had thought he was nervous because he loved her. He was nervous because he was executing a plan. She sat with the weight of that for a long time. The grief was different than she'd expected. It wasn't about Prescott, not entirely. It was about herself, about the woman who had smoothed over inconsistencies because she wanted the life she had built, who had chosen not to ask certain questions because asking felt like distrust, and she didn't want to be the kind of wife who didn't trust her husband. I protected his lie, she thought. For 6 years, I kept his secret from myself. At 6 in the morning, Nora woke up, still in her blazer, legal pad on the floor where it had slid in the night. She looked at Celeste. You haven't slept. I've been working, Celeste said. Nora got up and ordered coffee from room service, and then sat on the edge of her bed and opened her laptop. I have something, she said. She turned the screen around. It was a document from a Nevada family court, dated 3 years ago, a formal notice regarding a procedural deficiency in a dissolution filing. Addressed to Prescott Hargrove. Celeste read it twice. He received this, she said. 3 years into our marriage. Yes. And he did nothing. He made a deliberate choice to do nothing, Nora said quietly, which is legally very different from an oversight. The coffee arrived. Celeste poured a cup she didn't intend to drink and held it in both hands. He didn't make a mistake, she said. He maintained the deception, actively, while I was his wife, while I was carrying his child. Yes. She set the coffee cup down. I want to meet Harriet Beaumont today, she said. Not tomorrow. Today. Nora picked up her phone. I'll call her now. Celeste walked to the bathroom. She ran cold water over her wrists the way her mother had taught her. For when the world is too much, Dot had said, just the wrists, just the cold water, it helps. She looked at herself in the mirror. She did not look like a woman whose life had fallen apart. She looked, if anything, more herself than she had in a long time. Something about the crisis had stripped away the layer of careful pleasantness she had been maintaining. I deserved better than a man who practiced his lies in the mirror, she thought. And my daughter deserves to be born into honesty, even if that honesty is devastating. She dried her hands. She went back out to start building her case. The coffee shop was on the west side, between a dry cleaner and a small bookstore with sun-faded paperbacks in the window. Celeste arrived first. She chose a corner table with her back to the wall because she was a former corporate lawyer and old habits persisted. She ordered sparkling water. She put both hands flat on the table and she waited. Harriet Beaumont came through the door at 4 o'clock exactly. She was 53 years old, silver-haired, cut short and clean, composed in the way of women who have survived things and made peace with the surviving. She wore a gray coat and carried a manila envelope, and she moved through the coffee shop with the unhurried steadiness of someone who had been waiting for this particular meeting for a long time. She sat down across from Celeste. They looked at each other. You look like you're holding up, Harriet said. I'm holding, Celeste said. That's approximately accurate. A server came. Harriet ordered coffee, black. The server left. I should have called you 2 years ago, Harriet said, when I found out about you. I told myself it wasn't my business anymore, that I'd moved on, that whatever Prescott was doing was his problem to carry. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Then someone mentioned you were pregnant, and you changed your mind. I was pregnant when Prescott left me, Harriet said. Her voice was level. I lost the baby. The doctors said the cause was unclear. I have always believed stress was a factor. A pause. I wasn't willing to make the same decision again, the decision to stay quiet. The coffee shop was warm and ordinary. 2 women at the next table were having an animated disagreement about a television drama. A barista called out a name. A child in a stroller waved at nothing in particular. Harriet slid the manila envelope across the table. This is the original, she said. Keep it safe. Celeste opened the envelope. Inside, in a clear archival sleeve, was a marriage certificate. Worn at the fold from years in a safe, the paper was thick and official. She could see the county seal, the judge's signature, the date. April 14th, 2012. Harriet Beaumont, Prescott William Hargrove, lawfully joined. He told me the divorce was finalized in 2015, Celeste said. 2 years before we met. He filed, Harriet said. The paperwork exists, but there was an error in the dissolution filing, a procedural one. Small enough that a casual review wouldn't catch it. Large enough that a careful review confirms the marriage was never legally terminated. Did you know at the time? No, I discovered it 18 months ago. I was updating my estate documents and my attorney flagged it. Harriet's jaw tightened slightly. I confronted Prescott. He denied it mattered. He said it was a clerical issue that could be resolved quietly without involving anyone else. Without involving me, Celeste said. Without involving you? Harriet confirmed. Celeste looked at the certificate in the archival sleeve. The paper that Prescott had been counting on her, never seeing. The document that changed the entire legal landscape of her life. Why did you keep it? She asked. The original. Most people don't keep the original certificate after a divorce. Harriet was quiet for a moment. Because my marriage meant something to me, she said finally. Even after it ended. Even after I understood what he was. It was the record of something real. Something I lived. She looked at her coffee. He wanted me to give him everything when we separated. All the paperwork, all the documentation. He was very insistent about the certificate specifically. You refused. I said I'd misplaced it. A small, dry smile. I hadn't misplaced it. Celeste closed the envelope. She held it in both hands. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Harriet said. Protect your daughter. They sat for another hour. Harriet told her what she knew about the trust, not the details, but the existence of it, the timing of it, the way Prescott had mentioned it in their separation discussions as something that would protect his assets going forward. Celeste listened and stored everything and asked careful, specific questions. When she left the coffee shop, the certificate was in her evening bag. She stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at the sky. It was a flat, gray afternoon sky. Nothing remarkable about it. But she stood there, for a moment, with one hand on her belly. Somewhere along the way, she thought, I became a footnote in my own marriage, a legal instrument, a line in a trust document. Her daughter kicked. She straightened her shoulders. Not anymore. She called Raymond Alcott. I have the certificate, she said when he answered, and I need you to explain to me exactly what the Hargrove Family Trust says about putative spouses versus legal spouses. Because I think there's a gap in it, and I think that gap is where we start. I'll see you first thing Monday morning, Raymond said. Today, said Celeste. I'll see you today. A pause. I'll move some things, Raymond said. Raymond Alcott's office was on the 42nd floor. The city spread in every direction below the windows. From up here you could see the whole map, the streets and the bridges, and the distant shimmer of the river. It was clarifying, in the way that altitude always was. You could not get lost in the details when you were high enough above them. Celeste sat across from Raymond and explained everything. She was precise. She gave him dates and names and the sequence of events in the order they had occurred. She did not editorialize. She had been a lawyer long enough to know that facts presented cleanly were more devastating than facts wrapped in emotion. Raymond listened without interrupting. He made notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting, so small it was nearly illegible. When she finished, he set down his pen and looked at her. The certificate, he said. She placed the envelope on his desk. He opened it carefully, handled the archival sleeve with the practiced respect of a man who understood what documents were worth, and studied the certificate for a long time. Then he looked up. Tell me what you know about the Hargrove Family Trust, he said. Almost nothing, she admitted. Prescott said it was standard estate planning. I never saw the full document. I asked once, and he said it was complex, and that his attorneys had it handled. And you accepted that? I accepted that, she said. Yes. Raymond turned to his computer. He typed. He read. His expression did not change, which she had already understood was Raymond's version of reacting strongly. I had a colleague in Nevada pull the trust documents this morning, he said, when you called me from the coffee shop. He turned the monitor slightly toward her. The Hargrove Family Trust was established in 2014. Standard instruments throughout. He scrolled down, except for an amendment added 18 months later, in 2016, the year Prescott proposed. The amendment, Raymond said, introduces a clause specifically addressing what it calls subsequent legal spouses. Any subsequent legal spouse of Prescott William Hargrove is entitled to a fixed dissolution settlement. He named a figure, one time, non-negotiable. The figure was significant by ordinary standards. It was a rounding error on Prescott's actual assets. He built the ceiling before he proposed, she said. He amended the trust to limit exposure before he asked you to marry him, Raymond confirmed. Celeste looked at the view. A plane crossed the sky in a slow, unhurried arc. He was never planning to let me leave with anything real, she said. That would appear to be the design. But the clause says subsequent legal spouse. She was working through it as she spoke, the way she used to work through contract language at the firm. If my marriage was void, if I was never his legal spouse, then you are not subject to the clause, Raymond said. You fall into an entirely different legal category. The putative spouse doctrine, combined with your status as the mother of his natural child, gives you significantly broader rights than the clause was designed to permit. She sat with that. He designed a trap, she said, and built it so carefully that he didn't account for the possibility that the trap itself would expose the fraud. People who believe they're the most prepared person in the room, Raymond said dryly, occasionally forget to account for variables they don't know exist. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Something moved briefly in his expression. There's one more thing, he said. My Nevada colleague found something in the trust correspondence, a document that was not part of the original filing. It was discovered in a secondary folder attached to the trust record. He paused. Miss Hargrove, how familiar are you with the concept of a preemptive disclosure agreement? Familiar enough. Prescott's attorneys drafted one in 2016, Raymond said. It was never presented to you, presumably because presenting it would have raised questions about why it was necessary, but it was signed. He turned the monitor further toward her. By Prescott, in front of two witnesses. She leaned forward. The document was dense with legal language, but the critical paragraph was near the top, where critical paragraphs in legal documents usually lived, because attorneys wanted the important thing seen immediately. The signatory acknowledges that Harriet Grace Beaumont Hargrove remains his legal spouse at the time of this instrument's execution. The signatory further acknowledges that the subsequent marriage entered into with Celeste Ann Grant is entered with full awareness of this fact. He had signed it. He had signed a document in which he admitted, in his own words, before witnesses, that he knew. The room was very quiet. This is a confession, she said. In his own handwriting, Raymond confirmed, before witnesses, held in a trust document he believed was inaccessible to you. Her hands were completely steady. She noticed this. She thought it was perhaps the most useful thing her body had ever done for her. Where do we pile first? She said. The restaurant Stewart had chosen was on a quiet block in a neighborhood nobody fashionable frequented. Small tables, checked cloths, the kind of place where the pasta was made by hand and nobody was performing for anyone else. He was already seated when she arrived. He stood when she entered. She noted the manners, old-fashioned and sincere. He looked terrible, not sick, worn, like a man who had been carrying a weight he hadn't agreed to carry and was tired of the distance between where he was and where he thought he'd be. Miss Hargrove, he said. Tell me about the Seattle account, she said. She sat down. I'm not here for preamble. Stewart exhaled the breath he had apparently been holding since the restaurant opened. Prescott has been maintaining a separate financial structure for approximately 4 years, he said. The Seattle account is the center of it. It's structured as a business development fund. That framing gives it enough cover that standard audits don't flag it. Its actual purpose is to fund a secondary life. For Vivian Aldridge, yes, an apartment, travel, gifts. A pause. The ring. Tell me about the ring. He purchased it 18 months ago. He commissioned the forget-me-not engraving specifically because Stuart stopped. Because he knew about my ring, Celeste said. He knew what mine looked like. Yes, he had yours appraised without your knowledge before he commissioned the replacement. He wanted them to be identical. Stuart's jaw tightened. The replacement ring cost $42,000. The insurance claim on yours was also $42,000. He kept the insurance money. Celeste picked up her water glass, set it down. He stole my ring, she said. Had an identical one made for his mistress, filed an insurance claim on mine, and kept the money. That is accurate. How much did the Seattle account spend in 4 years? Stuart named a figure. She absorbed it. And you knew about this for how long? He looked at the table. 14 months. You found out the same month he took my ring. Yes? And you said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my role. He looked up. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had been having a sustained argument with himself for 14 months and was done pretending the argument wasn't happening. I told myself it would end. It didn't end. Why are you telling me now? Because last week, Stuart said, he asked me to move certain assets before the quarter close. Move them in a way that would reduce the marital estate significantly before any legal action began. He paused. I'm not willing to do that. I've never been asked to be complicit in something specifically designed to harm someone who doesn't deserve it. Celeste looked at him steadily. She's pregnant, he said quietly. You're pregnant. He was asking me to take money from a pregnant woman and her unborn child. There's something else, she said. I can see it. Stuart reached into his jacket pocket. He removed a folded document. He placed it on the table between them. She unfolded it. It was a copy of the preemptive disclosure agreement, the same one Raymond had found. But this copy had a handwritten note in the margin in Prescott's distinctive angular script. Keep with trust. Do not file publicly. How did you get this? She asked. His personal safe, Stuart said. I've had the combination for 3 years, emergency access. He gave it to me after the SEC inquiry in 2020 in case anything happened to him and someone needed to act quickly. He gave you access to his safe. He trusted me completely, Stuart said, which is why he didn't think to wonder what I might find there. She folded the document back along its creases. She added it to the growing file in her bag, the file that was getting heavier by the day and more irrefutable with every addition. I want you to understand something, she said. What I'm doing is not about destroying him. I have a daughter who will need a relationship with her father. I need you to understand that what I'm building is a legal protection for her, not a personal vendetta. I understand that, Stuart said, which is part of why I'm here. Will you provide a sworn statement? I've already spoken to my own attorney, he said. The statement is being drafted. She nodded. She picked up her water glass again. This time she drank from it. Thank you, Stuart, she said. I'm sorry I waited 14 months, he said. I'm sorry that decision cost you time and comfort and peace of mind that you deserve to have. She looked at him. She thought he meant it. She thought that this was a man who had made the wrong call for the reasons people usually made wrong calls. Self-protection, uncertainty, the hope that things would resolve themselves, and had eventually chosen to be better than that. Don't apologize to me, she said. Testify. Yes, he said. That's what I'm going to do. She left the restaurant at 9:30. She sat in the back of the cab, and she looked out at the city. Her daughter was quiet. The night was clear. She went over everything she had accumulated in 4 days. The certificate, the Nevada letter, the trust clause, the signed admission, Stewart's testimony, the Seattle account. He had built something very careful and very complex. And he had been so certain it was secure that he had never considered what happened if the wrong person found the combination to his safe. She took out her phone. She called Nora. "We file the asset freeze Monday morning," she said, "before his attorneys know we're moving." "Raymond already has the motion drafted," Nora said. "He called me an hour ago." "Good," said Celeste. "Good." She put the phone away. She watched the hotel appear at the end of the block. Starting over with a newborn feels impossible, she thought, but raising her inside this lie feels worse. It would always feel worse. No amount of security was worth the cost of that particular choice. She got out of the cab. She went inside. She had work to do before Monday. She reorganized the nursery at midnight. Not the real nursery. That was in the house where Prescott was presumably still sleeping in the bed they had shared, and she was not going back there tonight or any night in the near future. The nursery she reorganized was the one she had started planning in her head months ago. The mental floor plan, the soft yellow walls and the white crib and the mobile with the small wooden birds. She refolded the yellow onesie she had bought 6 weeks ago and packed in her hospital bag. She had taken it out of the bag when she packed for the Alderton. It was on the hotel dresser. She folded it once, smoothed it flat, folded it again, then again, then again. On the 17th fold, she stopped. She sat on the edge of the dresser with the yellow onesie in her hands. She had been so competent this week, so precise. Every conversation measured, every document handled carefully, every call made from the right angle, with the right tone, in the right order. She was exhausted, not sleepy, exhausted in the deeper way, the kind that lives below energy levels and above despair. She thought about what she had lost, not Prescott. She was already making peace with that, or beginning to. The specific daily texture of a life, the Sunday morning coffee, the shorthand that builds between two people who share a home for years, the assumption of continuity, that tomorrow would look more or less like today. She had been planning her daughter's future inside a story that wasn't true. Every plan she had made about the nursery and the maternity leave and the first pediatrician appointment had been made inside a lie. Not her lie, his, but she had lived in it. She had furnished it. She had tended it like something real. Her phone screen lit up on the nightstand. Prescott. Again, she watched his name glow in the dark room. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. She did not answer. She set the yellow onesie down on the dresser. She went to the window. The city was quiet at this hour. 2 in the morning, and even the city that never fully slept was breathing slowly. She put one hand on the glass and one hand on her belly. "Hey," she said quietly, "it's just us for a minute." Her daughter shifted, the small, private communication of a body that does not know anything is wrong. "I need you to know something," Celeste said. "I need you to know that everything I'm doing right now, every document, and every phone call, and every meeting in offices on the 42nd floor, I'm doing it for you. Not for me, for you." She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. "I'm scared," she said, out loud, to the city and to her daughter and to no one else. "I'm scared of doing this alone. I'm scared of the first night when it's 3 in the morning and you're crying and I don't know why and there's no one to hand you to. I'm scared of making all the wrong choices and raising you inside my mistakes the way I was raised inside your father's." She stopped. She took a long, slow breath. "But I'm more scared," she said, "of raising you inside a lie, of teaching you, by example, that you stay when leaving is the only honest choice, of handing you a story about marriage that tells you that this is what love looks like." Her daughter kicked, hard and deliberate. Celeste almost laughed. "Yeah," she said. "Exactly." She stepped back from the window. She went to the bathroom. She ran cold water over her wrists, the way Dot had taught her. She stood at the sink until her breathing was steady and her hands were dry. She looked at herself in the mirror. She had been looking in this mirror every morning for a week. She had watched something change in the face looking back at her. Something had tightened or clarified, like a photograph coming into focus. Starting over feels impossible, she thought, but staying feels worse. It would always have felt worse. She turned off the bathroom light. She got into bed. She lay on her side, with her hand on her belly, and she listened to the city outside and the HVAC inside and the small internal sounds her daughter made. She did not sleep for a long time. When she did, she dreamed of nothing. It was the best sleep she had gotten in months. Dot Winslow arrived on Wednesday morning. She came through the hotel room door with a rolling suitcase, an insulated bag containing a chicken and rice casserole, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting to be deployed for approximately 96 hours and was deeply relieved the call had finally come. She set down the casserole. She looked at Celeste for a long moment. Then she opened her arms. Celeste walked into them. She did not cry, not yet. She pressed her face against her mother's shoulder and breathed in the smell of Dot's familiar perfume, something floral and slightly old-fashioned that she had worn since Celeste was 7 years old, and she let herself be held for exactly as long as she needed to be held, which was longer than she expected. "I never liked him," Dot said into her hair. "Mom, I'm being honest. You asked me years ago, and I said he seemed fine. I lied. He always seemed too prepared, too smooth. Your father, God rest him, wasn't smooth. He was real." Celeste stepped back. She wiped her eyes. She hadn't realized she'd cried until she felt her face wet. "You could have told me that 6 years ago," she said. "I tried." Dot cupped her daughter's face in both hands. "You were in love. Love is the best soundproofing money can buy." Harriet Beaumont arrived an hour later, and then Nora, who had been functioning as a mobile strategy office since Saturday, arrived with her laptop and a fresh legal pad. 4 women around a hotel, suite, dining table with coffee and Dot's casserole and the documents spread between them. Harriet looked at the spread for a moment. "He never imagined we'd be in the same room," she said. "He kept us in separate compartments," Celeste said. "That was the whole structure. Every piece of his life in its own box, no boxes touching." "He's very good at it," Harriet said. There was no admiration in her voice. "He's about to find out the boxes touch," Nora said. They built the plan over 3 hours. Raymond joined by video call at noon. What they constructed was careful and sequenced and elegant in the specific way that plans built by clear-eyed, determined women tend to be. Part 1. Harriet's attorney files the formal petition in Nevada asserting the uncompleted dissolution on their timeline. Before Prescott can get ahead of it, Part 2. Raymond moves to establish Celeste's putative spouse rights in their state, protecting the child's financial interests fully and completely, trust clause or no trust clause. Part 3. Stuart Bellamy's voluntary statement goes to the court. The asset freeze motion already filed that morning, holds the marital estate in place. This is solid, Nora said, reviewing the sequence. This is very solid. Dot looked at the documents. She was not a lawyer. She had been a school teacher for 30 years, and she understood, in the particular way that teachers understand things, when someone was being cheated. He built that trust specifically to make sure you'd leave with nothing, she said. Yes, Celeste said. And it's going to fail because the marriage wasn't legal. Yes. So the trap he built to protect himself is the thing that breaks him. Celeste looked at her mother. I hadn't thought of it quite like that, she said. I was a teacher, Dot said simply. I've seen a lot of cheating. It always has the same ending. Vivian Aldridge called Nora's phone at 4 that afternoon. There was a long pause before anyone spoke. I need to speak with Celeste, Vivian said. Nora covered the phone, explained. Celeste nodded. She took the phone. Vivian. I owe you an apology. Vivian's voice was controlled, careful, like someone who has spent a long time preparing a speech and is now realizing no preparation was quite enough. Yes, Celeste said. You do? He told me you were separated, that the divorce was nearly final, that you'd both agreed the marriage was over. A pause. I want you to know that I understand you have no reason to believe that, but it's the truth of what I believed. He's very convincing, Celeste said. He is. A short, humorless sound. He told me you weren't pregnant, that there had been a miscarriage, and it had ended the marriage emotionally, that you were both moving forward. The room was quiet. Dot and Harriet and Nora were all watching Celeste's face. He erased our daughter, Celeste said. I didn't know about your daughter until Saturday night, Vivian said, when you walked through the door of Meridian. A pause. I didn't know about the first wife either, about Harriet. He never told me about any of it. What do you want, Vivian? I have texts, Vivian said. 3 years of text messages, conversations where he tells me specifically that the divorce is nearly complete, where he references what he's going to offer you in the settlement. His words. Time-stamped, all of it. Celeste said nothing. I'm going to give them to your attorney, Vivian said. I've already sent them to mine. I'm not going to let him tell a story where I was the knowing participant in something I didn't know. And the ring? Celeste asked. A long pause. I'll return it, Vivian said. After the call ended, Celeste set the phone on the table. The 4 women sat in the hotel suite. Dot was the first to speak. Well, she said. She picked up her coffee cup. He managed to make enemies of every woman in his life simultaneously. That's almost an achievement. Harriet made a sound that might have been a laugh. Nora was already typing. Celeste looked out the window. The hardest part isn't forgiving him, she thought. The hardest part is forgiving myself for staying when I almost knew, for choosing comfort over clarity, for building a life around a man I kept choosing not to see fully. She was done making that choice. She turned back to the table. What's next? She said. She wore gold. Not the apologetic navy of someone trying not to take up space. Not black, which felt like mourning something she had decided not to mourn. Gold. Floor length, empire waist, because she was 8 months and 3 weeks pregnant, and she was done pretending that was something to minimize. Nora thought it was a mistake. She said so twice, politely, and once with slightly less politeness, and Celeste listened carefully to all 3 versions and went anyway. The Hargrove Foundation annual gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Alderton Hotel, the same hotel where she had been sleeping for a week. The irony was not lost on her. She arrived alone. The maitre d' recognized her. He showed her in with the careful neutrality of a professional man who understood that something unusual was happening, and his job was to behave as though it was not. 200 people in the grand ballroom. She moved through them slowly. Her back ached. Her feet ached. Harriet's marriage certificate was in her evening bag, in its archival sleeve. She had not come here to produce it. She had come here to be present, to make clear to everyone who needed to know that she was not hiding. Bryn Delacroix found her first. Miss Hargrove. She was holding champagne. Her eyes were careful and warm. I've been hoping to speak with you. I know, Celeste said. I got your message through Raymond. The photographs, Bryn said quietly. They're yours if you want them. I haven't published anything. I won't publish anything without your direction. I appreciate that. I was at that table, Bryn said. I was 2 tables away. I saw the ring. I saw his face when she walked in. A pause. I saw her face too. What did you see? A woman who realized, in that moment, that she had been told a different story than the one that was true. Bryn sipped her champagne. She looked almost as shocked as you did. Almost. Celeste filed that away. She found Gretchen Hargrove, near the bar. 71 years old, white-haired, wearing dark green, and standing with the absolute stillness of a woman who had been navigating social situations she hadn't chosen for 50 years. They looked at each other. Celeste, said Gretchen. Gretchen. A long pause, the kind that contained a great deal of history and very little that could be cleanly said. You look well, Gretchen said finally. The formality of it was almost tender. I'm managing. Another pause. Gretchen turned her champagne glass slowly in her hands. He was always too much like his father, she said quietly, looking at the glass. I told him that once. He didn't speak to me for 6 months afterward. It was not an apology. It was as close to one as Gretchen Hargrove was constitutionally capable of offering. Celeste recognized it for what it was and received it accordingly. How is Theo? She asked. Gretchen's face changed. The careful composure softened around the edges. He asks about you every day, she said. He wants to know if you and the baby are all right. He made a card. A pause. It has horses on it. He drew them himself. Tell him we're all right, Celeste said. Tell him I'll see him soon. Gretchen nodded. Once, with something in her eyes that Celeste chose to believe was genuine relief. Prescott appeared at 9:15. He came through the crowd like a man who had been waiting for his moment and had decided the moment was now. Perfectly fitted tuxedo, controlled face, tired eyes behind the control. She could see that now, the tiredness that lived behind the performance. Celeste, he said, I didn't expect you to be here. I RSVP'd months ago, she said pleasantly. We should talk. Not tonight. Everything goes through Raymond. He stepped slightly closer. His voice dropped. You're being vindictive. She looked at him, fully, without the layer of hope or fear or love that used to sit between her vision and the actual facts of him. What she saw was a man who was afraid, not of her, specifically, of what she had built while he wasn't watching, of Stewart's statement and the asset freeze, and the Nevada petition and the signed admission that had lived in his safe for 8 years, of the accumulation of truth that he had always believed he could manage. I'm being present, she said. That's all? She moved away. She found a chair near the windows, the view she had always loved. The city spread below, patient and permanent, indifferent to the small, dramatic lives being lived inside the buildings. She sat with her sparkling water and her evening bag, and she thought about the shape of the last 6 years. Not the betrayal. She had been staring at the betrayal for a week. The larger shape, the years of making herself smaller. The concerns she swallowed, the questions she didn't ask, the intuitions she overrode because he was so calm and so reasonable. And surely a woman who overrode her instincts was a woman who trusted her husband. She had not been overreacting, not once. Every time she had almost known, she had known. The hardest part isn't forgiving him, she thought. The hardest part is forgiving myself for staying when I knew, for protecting his lie from myself for 6 years because the alternative felt like too much. She put her hand on her belly. Her daughter pressed back. I'm done now, she thought. I'm done making myself smaller to make room for someone who is already taking up too much space. She finished her sparkling water. She placed her empty glass on a passing server's tray. She went home to the Alderton Hotel. She did not look back. Her daughter arrived on a Tuesday. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, a full head of dark hair, a yell like a small emergency siren that struck every person in the delivery room as an excellent sign of robust general health and a strong sense of personal grievance about the transition she had just been required to make. Dot cried comprehensively. A nurse brought her tea and tissues. Nora, who had insisted on being present and was absolutely not a crier under normal circumstances, stood in the corner of the room with her hand over her mouth and her eyes very bright. Celeste held her daughter. She looked at her daughter's face, the scrunched, furious, perfect face of a person who had just arrived and was already impressed with the available options. "Hello, Margaret," she said. "Hello, Maggie." Maggie stopped crying. She looked at her mother with the unfocused, ancient attention of a newborn, that look that seems to come from somewhere very old and very wise. And she was quiet. "I know," Celeste said. "I know, but I promise it gets better." Dot laughed through her tears from the corner of the room. The Nevada court ruling had come 3 weeks before Maggie's arrival, on a Thursday. Harriet's attorney called at 9:14 in the morning while Celeste was eating toast and reading an article she had been meaning to read for months. The ruling was unambiguous. The original Hargrove marriage had never been legally dissolved. Prescott's marriage to Celeste was void. Celeste had acted in complete good faith. The putative spouse doctrine applied. Her protections were full and comprehensive, and the trust clause, the elegant trap Prescott had built before he proposed, the ceiling he had designed to keep her from leaving with anything real, did not apply, because the clause said subsequent legal spouse. And she was not a subsequent legal spouse. She was a putative spouse and the mother of his natural child. The clause that was supposed to protect him had failed in the specific way it was designed to protect him. Raymond called 6 minutes after Harriet's attorney. "The trust provides far less cover than he intended," Raymond said, "and your rights under the putative spouse framework are extensive." He designed a very careful trap and built it on a foundation that was already cracked. "What happens to him?" she asked. "The Nevada DA has the bigamy filing. That's their process. My job is your protections, not his consequences. I don't want to destroy him," she said, and she meant it. She had examined that statement carefully in the weeks since the dinner, turned it over from every angle, checked it for dishonesty. It was true. "I want my daughter to be able to look her father in the eye someday. I want the story of her family to be complicated and human, not only about damage." "That's noted," Raymond said. "And it's a reasonable thing to want." The meeting between Prescott and Raymond happened on a Friday. Celeste was not present. She had asked not to be. What Raymond told her afterward, Prescott accepted the framework. He did not contest the putative spouse protections. He agreed to a financial arrangement for Maggie that significantly exceeded what the trust had been designed to permit. "What's his position?" Celeste asked. "He knows what he has," Raymond said. "He's attempting to preserve what's salvageable." "Is anything salvageable?" "His relationship with his daughter Potentially, Raymond said, if he earns it. She thought about Theo, 8 years old, who drew horses on cards and asked about her every day. She thought about what it cost children to grow up in the ruins of their parents' worst stories. Tell him, she said, that the door for his relationship with Maggie is not closed. What he does with that is entirely up to him. Vivienne called from an unknown number on a Wednesday afternoon. Celeste almost didn't answer. She did. I wanted you to know, Vivienne said, that I returned the ring. To the insurance company? To you, Vivienne said. I left it at the front desk this morning, in an envelope. A silence. You didn't have to do that, Celeste said. I know, Vivienne said, but it's yours. It was always yours. What are you going to do now? I have no idea, Vivienne said. The honesty in it was complete. No performance, no self-pity, just the flat truth of a woman standing at the beginning of something she hadn't planned. Something different, something that's actually mine. Good luck, Celeste said, and found, to her own mild surprise, that she meant it. 3 weeks after Maggie arrived, Celeste received a card. Horses. Crayon, mostly blue, one horse significantly larger than the other and somewhat more horse-shaped. On the inside, in careful child's printing, I hope you and the baby are okay. I made this myself. From Theo. She put it on the dresser in the hotel room, which was now a long-stay apartment she had taken, while she found somewhere permanent. She looked at it every morning. She was sitting with Maggie one morning, 3 weeks old and exercising the emergency siren with some vigor, when Nora texted, "Good morning. Did you see the email from Patterson Alcott?" She hadn't seen it. She opened it one-handed while Maggie expressed strong opinions about the pace of breakfast. It was from a former colleague at her old firm. A brief note, an opportunity in family law, part-time to start, growing into whatever she wanted it to be. Someone who knew her history and thought, given recent circumstances, she might find it meaningful work. She read it twice. She looked around the apartment. Her apartment. Her name on the lease and her choices on every wall, and her mother's picture on the shelf, and Theo's crayon horses on the dresser. She looked at Maggie. Maggie was 4 pounds of opinion and 1 pound of actual breakfast, in Celeste's estimation. What do you think? Celeste said. Maggie yawned enormously. That's what I thought, Celeste said. Let's say yes. She would say it out loud, later that evening, to the apartment, and to no one in particular. Standing in the kitchen with the lights on, and the city outside, and her daughter asleep in the next room, and a cup of tea she had made for herself because she wanted it. She said, I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I finally stopped pretending. The echo in the apartment was honest and warm. She drank her tea. She looked out the window at the same city she had lived in for 6 years as Prescott Hargrove's wife. The same lights, the same bridges, the same river in the distance. Entirely different now. Better. The restaurant she chose for the dinner was small and warm and nothing like Meridian. Round tables, candles that smelled like eucalyptus. A menu on a chalkboard, the kind of place where nobody was performing for anybody. She arrived first. Maggie was in the carrier, against her chest, awake and examining the restaurant with the deep, serious attention of a person who finds the entire world extremely interesting and is not yet cynical enough to pretend otherwise. The maitre d' led her to the table. She sat down. She put her phone on the table. Then she picked it up and put it in her bag. She ordered sparkling water. She waited, not anxiously, not braced for anything, not running calculations about what she should say or how she should appear, for the people she loved to arrive. Harriet first, coming through the door with the composed steadiness that Celeste had come to understand was not coldness, but the particular bearing of a woman who had been through fire and knew her own temperature. Then Nora, who was already talking on her phone, but broke into a real smile when she saw Maggie's alert, dark eyes looking back at her from the carrier. Then Dot, who had driven 3 states because she wanted to see her granddaughter, and would Celeste please stop arguing about it, carrying flowers. Sweet William, pink, her own favorite, and moving through the restaurant with the cheerful authority of a woman who knows her place in the world and is entirely comfortable in it. Dot sat down. She leaned over to look at Maggie. Maggie looked back at her grandmother with enormous gravity. "Hello, baby girl," Dot said softly. Maggie's face did something that was not quite a smile. Not yet, but something in the neighborhood of one. Celeste looked at the table, the candles, the faces she had chosen, the daughter against her heart. She thought about 6 years ago, walking into a restaurant in a midnight blue dress, heading toward a table where everything was about to break open. The woman she had been then. Careful, maintained, already not entirely herself. She thought about the woman she was now. Not braver, exactly. Not harder. Something better than either. More honest, more her. The waiter arrived. "Welcome," he said. "Can I start you all with something?" Celeste looked at the table, at her mother and her best friend, and the woman who had given her the document that changed everything, and the daughter who had given her the reason to use it. "Yes," she said. She smiled. "We're celebrating." The content you just heard was carefully researched, written, and edited by hand by our team, created to bring you stories with meaning, with truth, and with something worth carrying with you long after the final word.